around collecting points. So, I spent this much in the supermarket, I've got some points, and I've travelled this far in the aeroplane, I'm going to get some extra points to get me some air miles or free flights or something like that. And, maybe sometimes you get 50p off some broccoli or a really obscure flavour of soup, or 2% off when you spend £75,000 or something like that. And there's even sometimes levels. Sometimes you can be like a bronze and you think, oh, clearly, not important enough here. And there's silver and gold, which makes you kind of want to join in even more and collect more, and makes you more important, for which would probably be lucrative to the company who is the holder of your card. As we continue in our series this term, thinking a little bit about what it means to be church here together in this time and this place, we come today to this idea of holiness. What does holiness mean to you? What does it mean to be holy? It's one of those words I think that we might have lost hold of a little bit. I wonder if it's sort of, certainly out there, and maybe a little bit in here, makes us think, holy, dull, or prudish, doesn't really want to have any fun, maybe a bit judgy. We've got that phrase, holier than thou. And I think perhaps sometimes when we sort of admit to other people that we're a Christian, they expect us to start wagging our finger at them. Oh, she's holy, isn't she? And it's a word that might have lost a bit of its shine in our kind of contemporary speak. And I wonder if, when we think of becoming holy, we think of it a bit like our supermarket loyalty card. Beep! I've been to church today, 10 points. Beep! I remembered to fill in my giving form, and I even increased my giving, or I'm a new giver. Oh, I've hit the jackpot, 20 points and an extra coupon when I go the next time. Soon I'm going to qualify for that super holiness level. And we go through life trying to accumulate holiness points, to try and become top level holy in the hope that God may somehow see our efforts and grant us some heavenly voucher. Perhaps we might even hope that he might love us a bit more. Holiness in the Bible is completely brilliant and completely not like a loyalty card. It isn't something to be earned like points, levels to be attained, although it is something to be practiced. We'll come on to that. Far from being boring or dull, it is glorious. So I want us to spend just a little bit of time this evening thinking about two questions, and I'm deliberately looking at them in this order. First, how do I become holy? How do you become holy? And what is holiness? So how do I become holy? I only remembered one of my visual aids, the loyalty cards. I feel a bit smug about that, but the other thing I want is a lanyard, and I'll explain if I can this way. Most years now, Simon and I, in fact every year for the past few years, Simon and I have volunteered, as other people here have, to be on a team at Satellite, so a Christian festival, lots of teenagers, lots of camping, really hard work, but totally brilliant. By the way, applications are open for the team this year. So I help with cooking. Lanyard's brilliant, thanks. Oh, I've gone bonus level holiness, I've got a swipe card. It's really hard work, but it's brilliant fun, and I help with the cooking. Simon is a steward, keeping everyone safe. And at the beginning of the week, we get handed a lanyard. I'm even going to put it on. The ideas above my station. And the lanyard shows us we are on team. Simon also gets handed a high-vis jacket, which is the sign of ultimate authority. I think you'll agree. I get handed an apron, so less so. And Simon gets handed, if you like, the identity of being a steward at the beginning of the week. He rocks up, he hasn't lifted a finger, and he gets handed the identity of being a steward. And I get handed the identity of being a cook. And because our identities have been designated like that at the beginning of the week, our behaviour changes. We do different things that week because somebody has handed us that identity. Simon goes about in his shorts and t-shirt and his high-vis jacket, keeping people safe, directing traffic, curbing some sometimes over-enthusiastic teenage behaviour before it gets out of hand, without trying to be a killjoy. Hard, but I think he manages it. And I chop an extraordinary amount of lettuce and cucumber, and I fill up cereal, and I clean the floor, and dance a lot actually, which isn't in the job description, but somehow that's part of being in the kitchen. And our behaviour changes because somebody said at the beginning, here's a lanyard, this is your identity. I much prefer a lanyard approach to holiness than a loyalty card approach to holiness. And I think, if you'll forgive me, Paul thinks the same as me. I would, wouldn't I? But in that Ephesians 4 passage, look, if you've got a Bible or something on your phone, it might be helpful to have it to hand. Ephesians 4 and verse 17, where we start. And I think this passage is kind of saying holy behaviour or holiness flows from identity. Our identity changes and our behaviour, our character changes as a result. So what do I mean by a changed identity? What's the equivalent of the lanyard in this passage? Well, it actually starts here with a bit of a head scratcher. Paul says in verse 17, you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking. So Paul is writing to the Ephesian church. It says that, at least in the versions we have these days. There's a bit of question about the early manuscripts, but it says to the saints in Ephesus. That's 1 verse 1. So he's setting out his stall. He's writing to the saints in Ephesus. Well, Ephesus, western coast of Turkey, was a melting pot of people. So there's the local people, then it's a place for trade and commerce, so people come from all over. It's a Roman outpost, so we've got a load of Roman people there as well. It was absolutely packed to the gunnels with Gentiles. Now, Paul was Jewish, and in the ancient Jewish culture, there were two ethnicities. There was Jewish, Venn diagram, very easy in this one, Jewish, and everyone else who wasn't Jewish, and the word they gave for that was Gentile. The Greek word is ethne, it's the word we get ethnicity from, it's all the nations. There's Jewish, and then there's all the other nations. And so the people in Ephesus were part of that. All the other nations, there was no other possibility unless a handful of them were Jewish. So when he says to them, don't live like the Gentiles live, well, if I was an Ephesian reading this letter, or hearing this letter, I'd think, well, what the flip am I meant to do? I am a Gentile. I'm meant to have some kind of out-of-body experience. It's like trying to run away from your shadow, isn't it? But it just comes with you. I am still a Gentile. So what does Paul mean? Well, he goes on to explain, I'm in verse 22 here. He says, you were taught to regard your former way, you were taught with regard to your former way of life to put off your old self. And then a bit further forward in verse 24, he says, put on or clothe yourself. I think that was what the t-shirts might have been about this morning. Clothe yourself with the new self. Now this word self, the word behind it is anthropos, which is where we get that word anthropology, which is like the study of humans and humanity, and that's what it means. Paul is saying, put off this old humanity and put on a new humanity. He's actually saying, as dramatically and foundationally as this, don't be a Gentile anymore. Be part of a new humanity. He's introducing a third identity category. Jews, Gentiles, new humanity. Now there are 3 categories, and you saints in Ephesus, you are part of this new humanity. Just want to stick in these verses for a little bit longer, 22, 23, 24, because Paul kind of sets out a 3-stage journey to becoming holy. He says, put off the old humanity, we've looked at that. And then there's a second stage in between, in verse 23. He says, be made new in the attitude of your mind, or the NRSV puts it, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And then the third stage is to put on the new self, the new humanity. So what does it mean to put off the old self? Well, Paul seems to have a fairly miserable view of the old humanity. And he probably means society, Ephesian society. And to be honest, the values of our society today probably don't look that different from those of Ephesus. He describes them as having futile thinking, ouch, verse 17, being darkened in their understanding and having hard hearts, verse 18, and even having abandoned themselves to indulgence and impurity, verse 19. It's a pretty strong indictment. Paul's making a statement here about societal values and what happens when human desire is unformed and unchecked. There was a society in Ephesus with self at the centre. It was a society that says, my entire purpose is to have the best life I possibly can, to fulfil my desires, to make myself comfortable, and ideally to do that a bit better than everybody else. I wonder if you can hear some of that in our own society. Esther prayed about people who want to grow their own significance, their own power. These are quite normal messages we hear day to day. Because I'm worth it. Have you heard that one? It's really difficult to escape that culture and those objectives when we are immersed in it every single day. But it's also really hard to be content in that culture. When there are more things to accumulate, more experiences to be enjoyed, more. It was Rockefeller, the world's first billionaire, who when asked how much money is enough, replied, always a little bit more. Paul's description of futility isn't far off the mark when we think about it like that. But Paul says to the Ephesian Christians, something's happened to you. Something's happened to pull you out of that self-first vortex, that old humanity. And that thing is this: you have met Jesus. You have met with Jesus. Risen, ascended Jesus, who shows to us the living God. And that's the second stage. Paul actually spends the first three chapters of Ephesians reminding the Ephesian church all about what Jesus has done for them. He isn't just picking this out of the blue and giving it one half of a verse. He's done loads of kind of background work on that. And if you want to just go home and read the first three chapters of Ephesians just to remind yourself of what's happened, that would be a really good thing to do. But it's in summary, it's not just knowing about Jesus, but it's actually knowing Jesus. That's what it means to have our minds renewed, to have our desires and our thinking and our priorities and our values shaped in a new way, that second stage. So it's our proximity to Jesus which qualifies us to put off the old self, allow our desires and our thinking to be shaped differently, and then to be able to be part of the new humanity and put on the new self, along with everybody else who has the joy of being in Christ. This is lanyard holiness. It is by meeting Jesus that you qualify, not by going over and over again and running as fast as you can to be as holy as you possibly can to earn God's favour. So to our second question, what does that actually mean to be holy? So as I say, first and foremost, holiness is a gift that comes from drawing close to Jesus, from responding to his call. If we focus on our identity, that proximity to Jesus, just spending time with him, we've already done it this evening, just being in worship, spending time in his word, spending time praying, perhaps spending time with other people, maybe you're in a life group or a home group or a youth group, being together with others, spending time with Jesus, holiness can only follow. It will happen. If we spend time trying very hard, our hardest possibly that we possibly can to be holy, we just get tired. In the New Testament, there are 3 words for holiness. The most common one is hagios. It actually comes from, it's what's used in the New Testament to translate a word in the Old Testament, which literally means to cut. So this is the word that means set apart, dedicated for a specific purpose, called, if you like. It can mean people, so it can mean saints. So the word to the saints in Ephesus in chapter 1:1, that's the hagios in Ephesus. Might be the hagion, can't remember. And the whole letter to Ephesians is written to them. It's a word that's often used to describe the Holy Spirit throughout the New Testament. And if you remember that reading from 1 Peter 2, or you might want to find it to look at now, Peter there describes the new humanity as a holy nation. A holy nation. That's kind of the same thing that Paul's getting at with the new humanity. A whole community of us, set apart and dedicated for God's purposes. So the first part of being holy is recognising God's call, that we are set apart for him, and that he has important things for us to do because we are set apart for him. The second word for holy is hosiotes. And actually I was learning something on this when I was preparing. And that's actually the word that's used in the Ephesian passage. So when Paul says you put off your old humanity, you're transformed in your thinking and your desires, you put on the new humanity, and you were created for this holiness, it's actually this one that is about character. It brings into play slightly old-fashioned ideas of devoutness, of piety, of commitment. And this is the place where we could get caught up in that I must do better kind of thinking. I must do more, be better, be more holy. But actually that character flows from identity. So again, back to making sure our closeness to Jesus is the most important thing. And the third word is hieros. If you think of the word hierarchy, that's where this word comes from. Hierarchy, ironically, means high priest, Jesus. So when we think about all the people at the very top, Jesus was about the most humble high priest you've ever met. I just find that really ironic every time I hear the word. But hieros, it means in a literal sense, involved in sacred rites. And it's used to describe a person sometimes, often translated priest. It's often to describe Jesus being that image of God to the world, standing in that sacred place between God and humanity. But here's the thing, folks. The word that Peter uses in that 1 Peter passage, 1 Peter 9, when he says you are a royal priesthood, he's not just talking to the priests like Simon or Richard or Ben or me. He's talking to everybody who knows and loves Jesus. So you are a royal hieratuma. You are priests if you know and love Jesus, in that you have a role, and we together as a community here in Reigate have a role of standing in between God and the people around us and showing them, reflecting, mediating something of the amazingness of God to those around us.